round of student panel conversations. Today we are very glad that all of you have come here, and we hope to have a nice, beautiful discussion on Kashmir. And we are happy. We also thank our panel for coming here. We have with us Mr. Drabu. He is a first-year student whose understanding of Kashmir is rooted in history, and he'll be telling us more about that. We have Abhimanyu Hazari. We have Anirudh Lekhi. We have Arvind Abraham. Now we do understand that conversations on Kashmir can be polarizing, so we'll request everyone that this discourse remains civil, and we hope that the general body will participate and we'll all make this an edifying experience. So now I'll pass the mic to Hita, who is the moderator for today's session.
Hello.
Hi. Just before we start the panel discussion, a few things. Firstly, we'd like this to be as informal and as inclusive as possible. By no means, I don't think there can be an exhaustive discussion on such a broad topic ever, and we will at least try to, I'm sure, cover as many aspects of it as we possibly can. So we'd like this to be as informal as possible. In furtherance of that, we'd also be entertaining intermittently comments and questions throughout the course of the discussion. Also, just not questions, but we'd really encourage members of the audience to have comments and share comments. Even if in the form of chits, you can pass those along here and I will read them out. Without much ado, I think we should start. So I think before we go on and talk about Kashmir, it's really important to have some sort of context about where are we basing this discussion. I'd request one of the panelists to maybe contextualize this debate. Is that right?
Okay, so we sat down yesterday and we were thought it might be useful to look at the historical context here, because so Kashmir wasn't always what we see it as today. So around the 15th century is when things started changing, because before that we had a largely Hindu community there, and it had a Hindu ruler. But in the 15th century we get the first Muslim rulers coming in, which is the Sayyid dynasty or the Shami dynasty. So this was initially this did not have much of an effect, because these were largely tolerant rulers initially. But by the time the fourth or the fifth ruler in this dynasty came in, he was radically Islamist, and he decided to convert the entire population if possible. So he issued a proclamation which was along the lines of either you convert or you die. And if you wanted to leave the area, you needed to pay a certain tax, and you could leave after that. But initially, so essentially it was very difficult to stay Hindu and stay in that area at that point of time. So and his son was also following a similar thought process. His son was Ali Shah, and this was Sikandar Shah. So between these two rulers, which was a space of about 80 to 100 years, the society transformed from a Hindu majority area, which was overwhelmingly Hindu majority, to a Muslim majority area. Now, after this, in this dynasty, and subsequent Muslim rulers were often moderate, or one of them was famously moderate. Zainul Abidin, in fact, allowed some people to reconvert to Hinduism after that. But largely you see that it was Muslim rule for a really long time until the Sikhs decided to came into Kashmir and conquered it. So when the Sikhs came in, this is where I think this is a slight inflection point, because you see with the Sikhs coming in, you have a situation where the Sikhs decided to tax the Muslims even they started discriminating against Muslims as opposed to Hindus, and they had some conditions on what Muslims could do, and they had a ban on slaughter of cows and other contentious things that sort of made it a little more polarized. And after that you had the Dogra rulers, who were again, like Hindu rulers from Jammu, and had basically gotten there thanks to the British. Like they'd basically overthrown the Sikhs with the help of the British. So even these were seen as non-representative of the community by the Muslims. But through this period, like the Muslims were largely, I mean, what we need to understand about these Muslims is that, like, I mean, they were either 4th or 5th generation converts, and the first 3 generations didn't even necessarily believe in the tenets of Islam, or maybe hadn't even read the Quran. They were just like forced to convert initially, and a lot of them stayed Muslims because of expediency, because it was Muslim rule at the end of the day. And after that, the Mughals had also come in between, and that was again like Muslim rule largely. So it was convenient for them to be Muslims. But I mean, around the Sikhs, it starts getting polarized, but it's still like largely a peaceful environment. Now, where this starts changing is in the 1940s. Like in the 1940s, especially we all know about the whole the session document and like the controversy therein. But the circumstances in which it was signed was these tribals coming in from Pakistan, and like these were largely, I mean, these were largely tribals who were, I mean, some of them were Pakistani, some of them were Kashmiri tribals from a particular part of Kashmir which was keen on being on Pakistan side. And as they came in and they captured, like they came up to Baramulla, where in fact my grandfather did live at that point of time, and they were just killing Pandits left, right and center. So the Pandits had to, like, that was the first real exodus of Pandits after the medieval ages, because in the medieval ages, obviously when during the reign of terror of the 15th century, they, like a lot of Kashmiri Pandits did leave, but after that this was like a major, the second major exodus. And my grandfather like gave me like a lot of personal anecdotes from this era, and like he came without any papers. Like a lot of his brothers and sisters were killed off during that period, and he's of the opinion that like there was local help for them. Like there were local people who diverted them to like the Hindu households and stuff. So that is something that like that's the first like Kashmiris who start, I mean, the animosity towards, like Kashmiri Pandit animosity towards the Muslims begins there, because before that it was largely, I mean, seen as a very, I mean, the people who moved out before that were basically moving out due to problems with the rulers rather than the community itself. Here is the first time that like you have a problem with the community and you're moving out. So after that, I mean, the accession document and like the Pakistan stuff, I think Arvind is going to touch upon this, the modern history a little bit more. And I mean, after that, I'd just like to touch upon the like a little bit of the 80s, where like so basically a Farooq Abdullah government was overthrown by Ghulam Shah, and Ghulam Shah was a figure, and this was around the same time that Pakistan was also trying to like get into India through Kashmir, and like basically radicalize elements within Kashmir and start and sort of sponsor these militant organizations within India. So this was around in that context, like Ghulam Shah was somebody who came up and like said things like Islam is under threat, and like, I mean, first he overthrew the Farooq Abdullah government, and then after that he established a mosque within a Hindu temple in the near the Secretariat, and then after that then he was thrown out after 3 years because of the violence that resulted from the polarization. Subsequently, when he came back again talking about how Islam is under threat, and like basically like, I mean, we should target these Hindus, and as a result of that we got the violence we got in the 90s. That I think Arvind wants to deal with in a little more detail.
Okay, so I have a very slight disagreement with Hazari on one thing. I don't think the Hindu rulers, the Dogra rulers, actually overthrew the Sikh people under. So what happened was in 1839, Ranjit Singh died. Ranjit Singh, who was the last king of the Sikh Empire. And what happened subsequently was that in 1839, after he died, there was a huge succession row as to who was supposed to succeed him. It was finally Dilip Singh, his son, his 7th son, who ended up succeeding him. But under 1846, the British actually entered into a treaty with the Hindu Dogra rulers, and it was called the Treaty of Amritsar. Now, under the Treaty of Amritsar, Kashmir was actually sold to the Hindu rulers for a sum of 75 lakh rupees. And a lot of people say that this is the source of the discord between the Muslims and the Hindus, because you had you had a Hindu dynasty taking over an entire area, an entire state through illegitimate means and basically through a sale. Now, what is very necessary to understand over here is that even though that was the case, if you look at the history of Islam itself in Kashmir, the kind of Islam that was practiced in Kashmir was a brand of Islam that came from Central Asia. It was called the Khorasan, the brand of Islam. Now, that brand of Islam was basically deeply rooted into Sufism, and it was not the extreme form of Islam that we are associated with in Kashmir today, the jihad that we talk about, the Nizam-e-Mustafa. So, what you need to understand is that even if you look at the history, you had till 1339, you had this person called Sayyid Sharafuddin Abdur Rahman Surawardi who came to Kashmir. He was the first Muslim preacher in Kashmir, and he was popularly known as Bulbul Shah. Now, Bulbul Shah actually converted he converted the Hindu king. His name was Rinchan Shah, and he became Sayyid Sadruddin Shah. Rinchan Shah was then converted as Sayyid Sadruddin Shah. Now, what happened subsequently was that the mode of conversion was not through force at all, and this is something I completely concede. It was not jihad, it was not military expansion, it was nothing like that. It was a very organic conversion of the Hindus in Kashmir. But what you also need to understand is that after that had happened, the Muslims and the Hindus in Kashmir were living in a very harmonized environment, and there were a lot of influences of Islam in Kashmir could also be rooted into a lot of influences from Hinduism. So, in fact, if you look at the history of the Dogra rule from say 1846 to 1947, there was only one instance between the Muslims and the Hindus only in 1931. And that is the only instance that is recorded in Kashmir that was an instance of there being violence ensuing between the Hindus and the Muslims, and that was because of there was protest against Raja Hari Singh at that time. And which is why what I'm trying to tell you is that if you look at Kashmir in a very isolated way and say that no, it was an extremely illegitimate occupation by the Indian forces because you had a Hindu majority area that was taken over by a minority Hindu kingdom or a fiefdom over a Muslim majority population, that would be a very simplistic way of understanding things, because to start with there was no discord between the Hindus and the Muslims to start with. Where the discord started is something I'm going to elaborate upon later, and I'm going to tell you about how Pakistan is primarily to blame, because it had, if you read this book called India at Risk, which actually Arvind had gifted to me long back, it's a book that's written by Jaswant Singh, who is the former Defence Minister of India, and in that book, it's very emphatically recorded by Jaswant Singh that these Qawwalis, who were the tribal people from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan, formerly known as NWFP, they were the Afridis, the Waziris, the Mahsuds. All of them actually came to India because this was primarily a diversionary tactic that Pakistan had employed to make all these lawless people come to Kashmir, because what had happened was that right after independence, you had the British who had basically foregone their responsibility there and were on their way out. So they were basically tribal people who did not have any amenities, education, and they were basically lawless people at that time. And the Pakistanis and Jinnah actually knew that this is what they are capable of. So they actually, instead of their coming down south to Peshawar and all, they used that as a diversionary tactic to send them to Kashmir. Now, very smartly, they used these people who then started talking about the Nizam-e-Mustafa and Jihad in Kashmir to create havoc for India, and subsequently in April of 1948 they actually deployed the Pakistani army also. Now, but that's something I'm going to talk about later, but whoever wants to comment can go ahead now.
I don't believe I'm saying this, but I actually do agree with Vicky for a while. So the thing is, how it starts is that, so the thing is, the history that Hazari provided us is fairly accurate, but like there's some changes, as Vicky already pointed out. Then the Hindu ruler, it's actually I think the Buddhist ruler that was the Rinchen Sanghu by Bulbul Shah was converted into Islam, and after that, after his reign, his general, I think if I'm not mistaken, Shah Hameen took over, and there were forceful conversions. But then the figure already spoken about by Hazari, Zain al-Abidin, came into play. He sort of told them that it's perfectly alright in case you want to preach your own religion, and went about subsidizing the reconstruction of temples and everything else. And so, and what you need to know about the history of Islam in Kashmir is, apart from the figure that Lekhi already spoke about, there's one person other than him called Shah Hamdan. And Shah Hamdan was a guy who came from Persia in, I think, 14th, 15th century, and he brought about a very different kind of Islam. So what he did is, there's this one document which you'll never see any Indian, like if I make a categorization between Kashmiri Muslims and Indian Muslims, you will never see any Indian Muslim have. It's called the Aurad-e-Fatiha. So what he did was, understanding the notions or the practices of the Pandit community or generally the Hindu community, there were a lot of shlokas and other such objects which exist within the Hindu community. What he tried to do was sort of provide an alternative framework, which was utilizing different passages from the Quran and any other such documents, and make for it's sort of a ritual, sort of song, it's not dance per se, but like a more Sufistic form of Islam. So you just keep that in mind. And why we go into the history of it is what I'm trying to, why we're talking about this, is to understand the alienation which Kashmiri people face. The fact that there are oppressors from outside that have existed for the longest time, specifically since 15th century. And this is where I'll refer to history again. There's this guy called, I'm sure you might have heard of him, called Akbar. What Akbar did effectively once in 1500 when he came to power was he tried to, there are alternative accounts, and I do agree that it might be different. Akbar in 1500s went ahead and tried to take Kashmir, because that's literally what kingdoms do, they conquer more territory. When he was trying to do that, he failed twice, and the third time he sort of called the guy who was in power at that particular point in time, Muslim ruler called Yusuf Shah, if I'm not mistaken. His name was Yusuf. When he, to sign a peace accord, when he came to Delhi, Akbar put him in jail and then took over Kashmir. And that's as simple as that. And since then, if you look at it, after that there was Mughal rule, taken over by Afghan rule, which Afghanis were also there. Then it was Sikh rule for another 10-15 years, and as Lekhi very nicely pointed out. Then, as per the Treaty of Amritsar, wherein which for 7.5 million rupees, the land was sold to Gulab Singh. Was sold to Gulab Singh, who then, because he sort of betrayed Ranjit Singh and his empire, and that's why he got this, that was his competition. So effectively, and Kashmiris like to view it in a certain way. Every Kashmiri at that particular point in time was sold for 2.5 rupees. So you can understand where this kind of narrative comes from. Another very interesting aspect of it is, despite the fact that there is no animosity or like existing animosity at least at that point in time between the Hindus and Muslims at that particular point in time, the thing is, the nobles that existed within the Dogra code were primarily, not all of them, primarily Kashmiri Pandits, right? And at that particular point in time, there was forced labor, effectively amounting to slavery. Not slavery, but yeah, somewhere you can understand the, like, you don't pay them for the work that they do, the feudal laws and all that stuff. So in that scenario, wherein which there were Christian emissaries, one of them being Tyndale Biscoe, who set up a school which is right now one of the best schools in the valley. So they wrote about how the Muslim population, the general Muslim population, they're not specifically talking about the Muslim population, but basically the lower strata of the social classes, how they're absolutely in abject poverty. An example of this is when Hari Singh went and took his Cadillac to a village. These guys started feeding the car. They were giving it grass, and they were really sad that the car wasn't eating grass. So you can understand the nature of people that existed at that particular point in time. So in this context, Kashmiris have always viewed, like it's in the Kashmiri genome that you've been oppressed, and like it sort of formulates a part of the Kashmiri identity, and that's something which you necessarily need to remember whenever they refer to India or any other such institution. They refer to it as somebody else who does not own our land, who is not a part of our community, and that's why we're against you. And this, so it leads us to this whole notion: if it's anti-India, is it necessarily anti-Hindu? It's not, because Hindus have existed with considerable amity, and these classes have existed together for the longest time. So making that distinction, sort of, how do you put this? It sort of corrupts the way, like the taste in your mouth. Like if you've been hurt constantly through military aggression in any other such ways, and it's just putting salt in your wounds, and that fundamentally has led to, if I may so argue, led to the rise of this extremist form, or at least people accepting this whole notion of extremist Islam today, in today's day and age, which I must say is a disgusting notion, regardless of like however legitimate the whole thing is. And I think after this, the modern context will be dealt with by Arvind. So,
Okay, I have certain like disagreements with what Mukhi just said about a lot of the modern stuff, and especially with the parts about like the contextualization in with regard to how like anti-India doesn't necessarily mean anti-Hindu and how that's come up. But more importantly, I just wanted to sort of point out that I still continue to believe that like the conversion was not organic as such, because within 80 to 100 years there were these two rulers who within a reign of terror managed to convert these people. Now of course, like I mean, Zainul Abidin is like a great figure in that regard, the one who came right after these two, and he did allow for some conversions back. But the fact is, like it was continuous Muslim rule after that. After that the Mughals came in, and like even though Akbar was famously like secular, but the rest of them weren't. And I mean, there was always this underlying fear that like if you convert, what about the next ruler? What about the next guy who's going to come in? Is he going to be like Zainul Abidin or is he not? And various Kashmiri Hindu communities during these rulers' tenures migrated, and I know that because my ancestors, my father's ancestors themselves like migrated during this period, and there are written accounts from them. And I mean, it's largely due to religion and like the fact that like they didn't feel safe in Kashmir, that they decided to migrate under religious leaders. So I mean, it's not fair to say that it was an entirely organic change and that these people were like completely safe, felt completely safe during that period. It was a threat, but it was a threat not from the people but the ruling class, because the people were people they related to. People were like just like them for a really long time. So.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you all of you all for giving the medieval history behind how Kashmir has come up. But before I start, I must add a few caveats. One, it's a bit dangerous when Malayali speaks on Kashmir, because the first time we had a Malayali speaking on Kashmir was our defense minister, Krishna Menon, who in 1957 has the Guinness World Record of giving an 8-hour long speech and eventually collapsed after giving the speech. So I'm sure if I ever start emulating Krishna Menon, Hita, please stop me, because I'm sure there's no one here who can take me out if that happens. And there are a few more things. Just to be politically correct, whenever I say Kashmir, I mean Jammu and Kashmir. So just because I say Kashmir, don't think I'm biased towards the valley. And another thing is that I'd like to contextualize it in a different manner. Now, let's look at what's happening right now, and then I'll just rush through the history. And let me tell you, this is one of the most complicated issues not only India faces in the world. And so I tried to write down a small speech today, but then it was just impossible. So I'm just going to speak, and I have some of my, if you come here you think I'm giving Saurabh's label or open book examination. I've got some documents here. So as I speak, don't mind if I refer to those documents. These are actually just copies of letters in case I get the dates wrong or I quote wrong. So I want to make sure whatever I say is factually correct. Okay, so I'd actually like to start by looking at what happened, although I'm not going to focus too much on it, what happened this last month. After Burhan Wani was killed, he's a terrorist, he's a member of the Hizbul Mujahideen, but after he was killed, for his funeral, thousands, and if some reports are supposed to believe, even a few lakhs of people came out. Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now, naturally, many of us who may not be associated or don't understand the sentiments there would feel angry with them. Hundreds of our soldiers, thousands of our soldiers have died there, and yet people there sympathize with the terrorists. But there's no point being angry. You have to understand as to why these people are relating to this person. And for that, you have to know the history. And sorry, I have to be a little bit of Krishna Menon right now, and I have to take some time in talking about the history. Let's go to the 1940s when the freedom struggle is going on. As we have a freedom struggle in India, parallelly there's a freedom struggle in Kashmir, led by Sheikh Abdullah against the Dogra king Hari Singh. And as you know, under the Indian Independence Act, The rulers of the princely states either had the option of joining one of the dominions of Pakistan or India or to remain independent. In fact, in 1946, and if you want to know where I got all this from, you can read Justice Anand's book on the constitutional history of Kashmir to understand it. In 1946, in fact, Jinnah called out to the Muslims in Kashmir and said, "Join Pakistan and unite together." And they responded by saying, "Go back, Jinnah." 1947, 15th of August 1947 comes and goes, and the ruler of Kashmir decides, had not made up his mind rather, whether to join India or Pakistan. So he sends out a telegram, both to Pakistan and India, to enter into what is called a standstill agreement, which is a status quo. Now, the Pakistani government enters into this agreement. The government of India, on the other hand, responds by saying that we'd rather have a negotiation. So I think this fact is very important because this shows that the Pakistani government accepts, when they entered into this agreement, they accepted Hari Singh as a representative of the people. Whereas we said we want further negotiations. And at that time, Sheikh Abdullah, who's leading the movement, was a very close friend of Nehru. In fact, Nehru himself went to Kashmir to argue his case when Sheikh Abdullah was arrested. Nehru waited by the border for 5 hours till he was allowed inside, and he was arrested and he went to jail in Kashmir as well. Some certain facts which today we don't remember. Now, August of 1947 is an important period. We all know from our history books about how Pakistan invaded in, the date we all recognize is the 20th of October, but actually if you go by the diary of Major General Scott, who was the head of the J&K armed forces, the Pakistani infiltration started by the 31st of August 1947. But before that, there's an incident which I'm afraid the media doesn't talk about and our history books don't talk about. Even the Pakistani history books don't talk about, as Muki told me. The incident was what's now known as the Jammu massacre. In the Poonch, and I have, if anyone wants to know the exact figures and details, I have the document here. Now what happened is in the Poonch district in August 1947, a revolt started. And why this revolt got momentum at that time was because the British had, of course, transferred the power, and Hari Singh no longer had his guarantors behind him. Another thing you have to know about the Poonch is, particularly if you go by the research of people like Christopher Snedden, the Poonch Muslims were considered to be like this martial race, and in the British Indian Army around 50,000 of the soldiers were from the Poonch. So Hari Singh realized that if I have to take down this rebellion, I have to do it with force, because these are people who can spread around, and the agitation did spread around to large parts of Jammu. And Hari Singh responds with massive brutality. The Dogra army goes out and massacres the people there. If you want to know certain figures and facts, Horace Alexander, who's a Quaker who was at that time, writes in the Spectator, which is the paper there, dated 16th of January 1948, that nearly 2 lakh Muslims have been massacred in Poonch, or in Jammu, sorry. Then you have the Times, which is a paper based in London, which reports that 2,37,000 Muslims have been massacred. And these are just people killed, many more were displaced. And luckily when I was just yesterday going through, and I just happened to chance by the Gandhi archives, and I found even Gandhi talks about it. And Gandhi writes, and if any of you all want to know the source, it's the 90th volume of the Selected Works of Gandhi, page 298. Where Gandhi says, that a massacre has been taken out in Jammu, and Hari Singh is responsible for it, but there's no discussion in the media about it. But Gandhi got his information from his sources. Another important fact which we probably need to understand is the fact that in Jammu at that time, 1946, 1945, if you actually look at the figures, 61% of Jammu was Muslim. In 20 years, that goes down to 38%. The massacre in Jammu was instrumental in this. Now, this incident, of course, caused a lot of resentment throughout the valley. If you want more sources, please read the letter Sheikh Abdullah writes to Sardar Patel, or Nehru's letter in December 1947 to Hari Singh himself, where they may talk about the massacre.